Think back to your last late-night drive. Was there a stretch of road that felt wrong? A car that lingered in your mirrors longer than it should have? These 10 accounts happened to real drivers, on back roads just like yours, ordinary routes that turned into something unforgettable. The stories ahead show that the most unsettling encounters don't always happen in distant or abandoned places. Sometimes the road you travel every day holds secrets just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Our first story begins with a routine shortcut through endless cornfields, where a simple detour becomes impossible to forget. Tom Weaver didn't expect anything unusual when he left his friend's place in southern Missouri that night. It was late, 1:45 in the morning, and thick fog pressed in on both sides of the empty road, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. He kept his eyes fixed on the faded yellow lines as his car climbed toward the old iron overpass, the metal beams barely visible through the mist. Tom had driven this route before, but the silence felt heavier than usual, broken only by the steady thrum of his tires on the pavement. As he crested the bridge, his headlights swept across the side railing and caught a sudden flash of white. He slowed, squinting through the haze. A girl stood alone on the edge of the overpass, her white dress glowing in the beams. She didn't move or wave. She just stood there, one arm extended, pointing toward the river below. Tom's hands tightened on the wheel. He rolled down his window a crack, listening for any sound, but the only thing that reached him was the low, static hum of the radio. He wanted to call out, but his throat felt tight. The girl's hair hung long and dark, almost hiding her face. She looked young, maybe 16 or 17. Tom thought about stopping, but something about the way she stood, so still, so deliberate, made him hesitate. He inched the car forward, hoping she'd step back or at least look at him. Instead, she kept pointing, her face turned away, and Tom felt a chill creep up his arms. Then, without warning, a child's voice crackled through the radio, soft and urgent. "Help me." The words barely rose above the static, but Tom's heart hammered in his chest. He looked back at the girl, but she was gone. The bridge stood empty, the fog swallowing everything beyond the headlight's reach. He pressed the gas, anxious to put distance between himself and whatever he'd just seen. Tom drove straight to a small diner a few miles down the road, hands shaking as he ordered coffee. He told the waitress what happened, expecting her to laugh it off. Instead, she grew quiet. "You saw Emily," she said, voice low. She explained that in 1986, a local girl named Emily drowned beneath that same overpass after her car slid off the road during a storm. Since then, drivers passing through on foggy nights sometimes saw her, always in white, always pointing toward the river. Some even claimed to hear her voice on the radio, asking for help. Tom sat there for a long time, staring into his coffee, replaying the image of the girl in his mind. He hadn't believed in ghost stories before, but the memory of her silent figure and the voice on the radio stayed with him long after the sun came up. He never took that route again. Not every strange encounter on the road ends with a warning or a tragedy. Sometimes the next set of headlights in your mirror carries a message you never expected. See, that settles in when you pull into a rest stop after midnight. The parking lot sits empty except for a few trucks idling in the far corner, their headlights washing over the wet pavement. You tell yourself it's just another stop on a long drive, but the silence stretches out, thick and close, making every small sound seem louder than it should. That's how it started for Mark, a delivery driver making his way through rural Pennsylvania. He'd been on the road for hours, the glow of his dashboard clock reminding him it was well past 2 in the morning. His eyes burned from staring at the lines on the highway, and the promise of a quick break and a vending machine coffee was enough to pull him off at the next rest area. He parked close to the main building, engine ticking as it cooled. The fluorescent lights inside the restrooms flickered, and the hum of the soda machine echoed in the empty corridor. Mark took a slow walk back to his car, stretching his legs and rolling his shoulders to shake off the stiffness. That's when he noticed the man standing near the payphone, just outside the circle of light. The stranger wore a yellow raincoat, hood pulled up, hands jammed deep in his pockets. Even though the rain had stopped hours ago, water pooled around his feet, as if he'd just stepped out of a storm. Mark hesitated, but the man didn't move or speak. He just stood there, watching. Mark unlocked his car, slid inside, and tried to ignore the chill creeping up his arms. He started the engine and glanced in the mirror. The man in the yellow raincoat was gone. Back on the highway, Mark tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The inside of the car felt colder, and the headlights seemed to barely push back the darkness. He kept checking his mirrors, half expecting to see the man's yellow coat appear in the back seat. The road stretched on, empty and silent except for the steady drone of the tires. Later, Mark mentioned the encounter to a clerk at a gas station. The clerk's eyes widened a little. "That's not the first time someone's seen him," she said. "People talk about a man in a yellow raincoat who appears at that rest stop, usually late at night. They say he died there years ago. Some folks think he's looking for a ride, or maybe just someone to notice he's still around." Mark didn't have an answer for that. He finished his coffee in silence, the image of the rain-soaked man lingering in his mind. Sometimes it's not the empty road that gets under your skin, but the figures you meet when you stop, even for just a moment. The road ahead always seems a little darker after an encounter like that, and every shape in the headlights makes you wonder what's real and what's just a trick of tired eyes. And when the rain starts up again, pounding against the windshield, the world outside feels even more uncertain. Sometimes it's the simplest routines that open the door to something you can't quite explain. Alex Kim was used to late-night deliveries, driving the same stretch of back road in the rain, windshield wipers working overtime. The storm that night made everything look different. Streetlights blurred, road signs hard to read, and the world outside his headlights pressed in tight. He was tired, just focused on getting home, when he spotted a figure on the shoulder ahead. The man stood in the downpour, yellow raincoat pulled tight, hood up. He didn't wave, just stood with his arm out, thumb raised, the water rolling off him in sheets. Alex's first thought was practical. Nobody should be out here in weather like this. He slowed, heart thumping, thinking maybe it was just his mind playing tricks. The guy looked real enough, but something about him made Alex hesitate. He told himself it was probably just the storm and the hour, nothing more. Still, Alex pulled over. The man climbed in without a word, water streaming off the raincoat, but somehow leaving the seat dry. Alex glanced over, trying to see the man's face under the hood, but the shadows were too deep. He offered a quick, nervous greeting. Rough night to be out. The hitchhiker just nodded, staring straight ahead, silent. Alex tried again, asking where he was headed. The man lifted a gloved hand, pointed down the road, then let it drop back into his lap. The drive felt longer than it should have. The heater was on full, but the inside of the car felt cold and damp. Alex kept sneaking looks at the passenger, trying to catch a glimpse of his face, but the hood never moved. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that it was just a tired mind, and the storm outside making everything seem off. But every time he looked, the man seemed less like a person, and more like a shadow with weight. At the next intersection, Alex glanced over again. The seat was empty. He hadn't stopped, hadn't heard the door open, and there was no sign anyone had been there at all. The floor mats were dry, the seat untouched. Alex's hands shook a little as he kept driving, the silence in the car even heavier now. The next morning, still unsettled, Alex mentioned the ride to his coworker, trying to laugh it off. The coworker's face went pale. "You picked up the raincoat man. He died in a landslide in the 90s, she said. "People see him out there sometimes, always in the rain. He never makes it home." Alex found himself thinking about that night every time the sky turned dark and the rain started up again. He never stopped for hitchhikers after that. Sometimes the only warning you get is a silence that sits in the passenger seat, refusing to leave. But not every figure on the roadside is alone. Some appear in pairs, and their presence lingers long after you've passed by. There's a stretch of road outside Willow Springs, Missouri, that most drivers avoid after dark. The overpass there looks ordinary enough. Rusted metal rails, chipped paint, the creek running black beneath it. Tom Weaver, a rideshare driver, had taken that route plenty of times, but he'd never given the bridge much thought until the night he saw the girl. He was alone, the radio low, the windshield streaked with rain. As he approached the overpass, his headlights caught a figure standing just at the edge of the railing. She looked about 12 or 13, barefoot, wearing a white dress that clung to her legs. Her hair was tangled and wet, hanging in dark ropes around her face. Tom slowed, thinking maybe she needed help, but she didn't move or call out. She stood perfectly still, one arm raised, pointing down toward the water below. Her skin seemed to glow in the headlights, pale and almost translucent. There was something about her eyes, wide, unblinking, fixed on him, that made Tom's chest tighten. He rolled down his window, the cold air rushing in, and called out. The only answer was the sound of the creek and the steady patter of rain. The girl didn't react, didn't even blink. Tom's first instinct was to get out and check, but something about the way she stood there, silent and unmoving, rooted him in place. He blinked, and in that instant, she vanished. The bridge was empty again. The road ahead washed in nothing but the weak glow of his headlights. Tom pulled over just past the bridge, trying to catch his breath. He looked back, but there was no sign of her. He sat there for a long moment, hands tight on the steering wheel before finally driving on. He couldn't shake the image of the girl's face, or the way she'd pointed toward the creek. Later, at a small diner down the road, Tom found himself telling the story to the waitress as she poured his coffee. She listened without interrupting, her expression serious. When he finished, she set the pot down and said quietly, "You saw Emily." She explained that in 1986, a girl named Emily drowned in the creek under that overpass after her car slid off during a storm. Since then, people had reported seeing her on rainy nights, always in white, always pointing at the water. Some said she was trying to warn drivers about the danger. Others thought she was searching for help she never got. Tom left the diner unsettled, the waitress's words echoing in his mind. He didn't believe in ghosts, but the memory of that night stayed with him. He never took that bridge again, and whenever he saw rain in the forecast, he found another route. Sometimes, it's not what appears in the middle of the road that unsettles you most, but what you glimpse in your mirror, just out of reach. Megan Foster always took Maple Avenue when she worked late. It was a quiet stretch, lined with old houses and the occasional flicker of porch lights, the kind of road that felt safe even after midnight. That night, her clock read 11:38 as she turned onto the empty street, headlights sweeping over damp pavement. She was only a few blocks from home when she saw someone on the curb, a woman standing under a street lamp, holding a blue tote bag close to her chest. Megan slowed, rolling down her window just enough to hear. The woman leaned in, her voice a near whisper. "Could you take me to the old church?" The request caught Megan off guard. She hesitated, but there was something about the woman's eyes, tired but not threatening, that made her nod. The woman climbed in, settling into the back seat without another word. Megan caught a whiff of something floral, like old perfume, and the faint smell of rain-soaked clothes. The car filled with silence as Megan pulled away from the curb. She glanced in the rearview mirror, trying not to stare. The woman sat perfectly still, tote bag clutched in her lap, gaze fixed on the window. Megan tried to make conversation, but the passenger only nodded, eyes never leaving the passing houses. The neighborhood faded behind them, and the road grew darker as they neared the outskirts of town. They passed the last traffic light before the church, and Megan checked the mirror again. The back seat was empty, the tote bag, the scent, the woman, gone. Megan's heart pounded. She pulled over, headlights shining on the crumbling stone sign for the old churchyard. The seatbelt in the back was still buckled, but there was no sign anyone had been there. She stepped out, the night air cold against her skin, and noticed a damp handprint on the inside of the back window. It was small, almost delicate, already fading in the cool air. Megan stood there for a minute, trying to steady her breathing. She walked around the car, looking for footprints or any sign of the woman, but the ground was undisturbed. The church loomed ahead, its windows dark, the steeple barely visible against the cloudy sky. Megan got back in, locking the doors and forcing herself to drive the rest of the way home. The floral scent lingered in the car until morning. The next day, Megan told her neighbor what happened. The neighbor's face tightened. "You're not the first," she said. "People say she waits for rides every few years, always asking for the old church. No one knows who she is. Some folks think she's looking for someone she lost." Megan didn't argue. She started taking a different route home, even if it took longer. There are roads where the past seems to wait for you, silent and patient, watching from the shadows. And sometimes, what you see outside the car is even harder to forget. A rest stop along the highway can feel like a place outside of time, especially after midnight. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, and the vending machines hum quietly in the corner. When I pulled in, the parking lot was empty except for a single car near the far end. I just wanted to stretch my legs and get a coffee before the last hour of my drive. I noticed him right away. A man sitting on a bench outside the restroom building. He wore a faded jacket and jeans, his hands folded in his lap. His head was down, and he stared at the ground like he was waiting for something. I thought about nodding or saying hello, but something about the way he sat, so still, so patient, made me keep my distance. I walked inside, bought my coffee, and tried to ignore the feeling that I was being watched through the glass. When I came back out, he was still there. This time, I heard him speak, though he didn't look up. "Have you seen my brother?" His voice was flat, almost tired. I shook my head, unsure what to say. He didn't react, just kept staring at the pavement. I got in my car, started the engine, and glanced over one more time. He hadn't moved. I sat there for a minute, debating whether I should ask if he needed help or a ride. Before I could decide, an attendant came out of the building and waved me over. She leaned in, voice low, and told me not to worry about the man on the bench. "He's here most nights," she said. "Lost his brother in a wreck on this highway years ago. Folks say he still waits, hoping he'll come back." She looked back at the bench. He died in that crash, too. You're not the first to see him." The words landed heavy. I looked again, but the bench was empty. The man was gone. I hadn't heard footsteps or seen him leave. There was just the quiet lot and the distant sound of trucks on the highway. Driving away, I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see him standing by the road, still waiting. The coffee tasted bitter, and the rest of the drive felt longer than it should have. I told myself it was just a story, that I was tired and letting my mind get the best of me. But the image of the man on the bench lingered. Stories like that make you pay more attention to the cars around you, especially when the weather turns and the road feels unfamiliar. Sometimes what follows you down the highway is much harder to explain. Jenna Morales had driven County Road 17 more times than she could count. The route home from her late shift at the diner was so familiar, she barely thought about it. Most nights, she just watched the wipers clear away the rain and counted the mile markers until her turn. But that night, something felt different as soon as she noticed the blue sedan in her rearview mirror. It was an old car, boxy and dull, the paint a faded blue that almost disappeared in the rain. Its headlights flickered, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, but always locked onto her. Jenna eased up on the gas, expecting the sedan to pass. It didn't. She slowed more, hugging the right side of the road, but the car matched her speed exactly, never getting closer, never falling back. The road was empty, except for the two of them, and every time she glanced up, the sedan was still there, holding its place. She tried to brush it off. Maybe the driver was nervous about the weather too. Maybe they were just being cautious. But the longer it went on, the more her hands tightened on the wheel. She signaled and moved over, giving the sedan room to pass. It stayed behind her, headlights flickering in the wet dark, never making a move to go around. Jenna's heart started to thump harder. She couldn't see the driver, just the shape of the car and the glare of the lights. The rain made it worse, turning the world outside into a blur. When the lights of a gas station appeared ahead, Jenna made a quick decision. She pulled in, parking right under the buzzing fluorescent lights. The blue sedan rolled in behind her and stopped a few spaces away. Its headlights snapped off and the car sat in the shadows at the edge of the lot. No door opened. No one got out. Jenna watched, waiting for something to happen. But the sedan just sat there, silent. The rain pattered on the roof. The gas station felt empty, too bright and too quiet all at once. Her nerves got the better of her. She started the car and pulled out, glancing in the mirror to see if the sedan would follow. The spot where it had been was empty. She looked back down the road, but there was nothing. No headlights, no sign of the car at all. It was like it had never been there in the first place. At work the next day, Jenna told her coworker about the blue sedan. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice shook. Her coworker didn't smile. "You saw the blue sedan?" she asked. "My uncle used to talk about it. People say a family died in a crash on that road years ago. Ever since, that car shows up on rainy nights. It never passes, just follows. And then it's gone." Jenna never took County Road 17 after a late shift again. Sometimes it's not the people you meet on the road that unsettle you, but the cars that seem to have nowhere to go except behind you, mile after mile. There are other sounds and shapes that haunt the night, ones that don't need headlights to find you. Derek Lynn heard the crying before he saw the railroad crossing. It was late, 2:03 in the morning, and the road through upstate New York was empty except for his car and the steady beat of rain on the windshield. He'd just finished a last-minute errand, thinking of his wife and their newborn daughter waiting at home. The world outside the headlights felt still, the dark stretching out in every direction. He slowed when the sound came again, a thin, high wail, the kind you don't mistake for anything but a child in distress. The old railroad crossing appeared up ahead, marked by sagging wooden slats and rusted rails. Derek's hands tightened on the wheel. There was no reason for a child to be out here. The crying rose and fell, always just beyond the reach of the headlights. It pulled at something instinctive. He pulled over near the tracks, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out into the rain. The beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off puddles and tangled weeds. Derek swept the light along the edge of the woods and across the abandoned crossing, calling out once, his voice lost in the storm. The crying kept moving, never close, never far, always hidden by the brush and shadows. He pressed forward a few steps, but the sound drifted away, thin and impossible to follow. After a minute, he gave up and turned back, rain soaking through his jacket. He reached his car and paused. There, on the back window, muddy handprints streaked the glass, small, uneven, like the hands of a child pressing from the outside. Derek's breath caught. He looked around, but no one was there. No footprints in the mud, no movement in the woods, just the fading sound of rain. He drove home with the windows up, checking the mirror every few seconds. The next morning, he mentioned what happened to his neighbor, a man who'd lived in town his whole life. The neighbor didn't look surprised. "That crossing's haunted," he said quietly. "A little girl disappeared there decades ago. People hear crying sometimes. Some find handprints. Most of us don't stop anymore." Derek wiped the window clean, but the feeling stayed. The next time he crossed those tracks at night, he kept his eyes straight ahead and his speed steady, no matter what he thought he heard. The sound of a child's cry in the dark is hard to ignore, but some places hold on to their sadness, and not every call for help is meant to be answered. Other drivers find themselves haunted in different ways, sometimes by what moves alongside them, matching their every turn, never quite letting them go. Priya Patel tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she turned onto Maple Lane. The mist that night was thick enough to blur the world outside her windshield, swallowing the headlights and turning the tree-lined avenue into a tunnel of shifting gray. It was early autumn, the kind of night when the air felt damp and cold, and the only sound came from the tires on wet pavement. She told herself it was just another late drive home, but the silence pressed in, making every shadow seem sharper. A shape moved at the edge of the beams. At first just a ripple in the fog, then a figure running alongside her car. Priya blinked, thinking she was imagining things. The figure stayed with her, always just at the edge of the light, never falling behind. As she glanced over, she caught a glimpse of a blue windbreaker and pale skin, the runner's face partly hidden under the brim of a cap. His eyes were shadowed, mouth set in a line, and for a moment she thought he might look her way. Instead, he kept his gaze forward, arms pumping in a steady rhythm. Priya pressed the gas, hoping to leave the jogger behind. Her speed crept up, 30, then 40 miles an hour, but the runner matched her pace. He moved with an ease that didn't make sense, never seeming to tire, always just visible in the mist. She looked back and saw him in the rearview mirror, his outline sharp against the swirling fog. It felt like he was watching her, or maybe just waiting for her to do something. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she tried to remind herself that things always looked stranger in the dark. At the intersection where Maple Lane crossed the old service road, the jogger suddenly veered across the street, cutting through the headlights. Priya's breath caught as he lifted a hand in a brief, silent wave and then disappeared into the mist. She slowed, searching for any sign of him, but the road was empty. The fog seemed even thicker now, pressing against the windows and swallowing the taillights behind her. When she finally pulled into her driveway, Priya sat for a long time with the engine running, trying to shake the feeling that something had followed her home. The next morning, she mentioned the jogger to her neighbor, describing the blue windbreaker and the way he vanished at the intersection. The neighbor didn't hesitate. "People say he still runs that route whenever the mist rolls in," she said. "Guy died there years back. Hit and run. No one ever caught who did it." Priya never took Maple Lane on foggy nights again. She found other ways home, even if they took longer, and she always kept an eye on the mirrors when the weather turned. Some stories stick with you, especially when they happen in places you thought you knew. But the road has other ways of unsettling drivers. Sometimes it's not a single figure in the mist, but something larger and more organized. Something that moves with purpose, silent and unbroken, stretching across the highway in the dark. Gas stations along empty highways have a way of looking the same no matter where you are. The neon lights flicker, the pumps stand silent, and the air feels colder than it should. Marcus Bell noticed all of this when he pulled in at 1:27 in the morning, hoping to grab a coffee and wake himself up for the last stretch home. The station was quiet except for the hum of the sign and the faint buzz of insects circling the lights. He parked under one of the lamps and stepped out, stretching his arms and rolling his shoulders to shake off the fatigue. Near the edge of the lot, just outside the circle of light, he saw a woman standing at the payphone. She wore a long coat that looked heavy for the mild night, her hair pulled back, her face pale under the harsh glow. She kept her head down, one hand gripping the receiver, the other pressed to her mouth as if to steady her voice. Marcus hesitated, watching her from a distance. She looked lost, maybe frightened, and her shoulders shook like she was holding back tears. He wondered if she needed help, but something about the way she stood there made him keep his distance. He went inside, bought a coffee, and tried not to look back at the woman. The attendant behind the counter was older, reading a magazine and barely glancing up. Marcus paid, then asked quietly if the woman outside was all right. The attendant's eyes flicked up, then back down. "She's been out there a long time," he said, his voice flat. "Some nights she shows up, uses the payphone, then disappears before anyone can talk to her. Folks around here know not to bother her." Marcus nodded, unsure what to say. He took his coffee and walked back outside. The woman was still at the payphone, her back turned. He thought about calling out, but the words caught in his throat. The night felt thick, heavy with something he couldn't name. He got in his car and sat for a moment, watching her through the windshield. She never turned around. After a minute, he started the engine and drove away, the neon lights shrinking in his rearview mirror. Later, unable to shake the encounter, Marcus searched online for anything about the gas station or the woman at the payphone. He found an old news clipping from decades ago. A woman who'd broken down nearby, wandered into the woods, and was never found. Locals said she used to call her family from that payphone, trying to get help before she vanished. Some believe she still returned, caught between leaving and finding her way home. Marcus never stopped at that gas station again. The memory of the woman's trembling hands and the silent phone stayed with him. Nights on the road can feel lonely, but sometimes the quiet hides stories that never quite end. Driving at night feels solitary. The hum of tires on the asphalt, the empty stretch of road ahead. But these stories remind us that the mundane can quietly shift into the chilling. A quiet bridge, a patch of fog, even a glance in the rearview mirror. These everyday moments can become thresholds to something you can't explain. The stories you've just heard come straight from real drivers who still question what they saw and why. It's a reminder that the most familiar roads can hold the most unsettling surprises. If these stories make your next late-night drive feel different, share your thoughts below. Look a little closer at the shadows and listen to the quiet. Drive safe and keep your eyes open. You never know what you might see just beyond the headlights.